There will be no victory parade in Moscow on May 9 due to ongoing Ukrainian attacks, drones and missiles. You know, such a statement from the Kremlin was very hard to imagine just a couple of years ago, but today it's a reality. Trembling with fear, Vladimir Putin announced that the Russian authorities have decided to radically cut back the traditionally lavish victory parade ceremony in Moscow. On May 9, 2026, it will take place without any military equipment. Instead of tanks and missile systems, only marching columns of occupiers will pass through Red Square. And this will be the case not only in Moscow but in all other Russian cities as well. Russians are simply afraid that their columns in the parades will just be destroyed by drones of the armed forces of Ukraine. Although this sounds more like an excuse. Well, the strikes on oil refineries in Tuapse show that there is no adequate air defense left in Russia. Everything is either at the front or protecting Putin's palaces. And against this backdrop, the Kremlin urged Russians to urgently take their savings out from under their mattresses and put them in banks, so the state could use this money to stabilize the economy. How do you like that? Nabulina said it just like that. The story is that this is the only source of financing for Russia's economy. My name is Pechiy. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like this episode, and leave any comment you want. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechiy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, the Russian authorities have decided to radically cut back the traditionally lavish Victory Day parade ceremony on May 9. This year, it will take place without any military equipment. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation announced this on Tuesday. Instead of tanks, missile systems and so on, only marching columns of occupiers will pass through Red Square. Cadets from Suvorov military and Nakimov schools as well as cadets from Cadet Corps will also not participate in the parade. They'll simply send some occupiers, troops from the so-called special military operation, who will march and that's all. But there's one more detail. Honestly, it's just laughable. Instead of a parade of military equipment, they planned a TV broadcast showing the work of the troops involved in the special military operation, as well as those on duty in the missile forces, in the aerospace forces, and on the ships. So basically, Russians will just be shown cartoons, they'll be shown movies about how these barbaric, occupying, savage Russian troops are dying in Ukraine, for example. So they'll show them cartoons and movies instead of the parade. It's funny that the Russian Ministry of Defense stated, quote, "The decision was made due to the operational situation." What happened? What's the situation like? Is everything going as planned for Vladimir Putin or not? What's happening with the situation? It's important to note here that parades without heavy equipment passing through were held in Russia from 1995 to 2017. That was a reasonable period when, well, why rattle weapons? But already in 2008, right before the savage Russian attack on Georgia, and before Vladimir Putin's statement that he wouldn't let NATO do anything, that NATO was going to seize Russia, and so on. So, in that 2008, they started rolling out missile systems, armored vehicles, tanks onto Red Square, this saber rattling, and so on. The point is that it was in 2008 that it became clear Vladimir Putin was betting on militarization and intimidating his neighbors, plus brainwashing Russians with the idea that the West decided to seize Russia, that all of NATO is against us, and so on. All of this started with those parades. After the seizure of Ukrainian territories in 2014, Vladimir Putin, emboldened by success, set a record in 2015. On Red Square, 194 units of wheeled and tracked vehicles from different years appear, as well as 140 airplanes and helicopters. But the 2024 parade set a record low. At that time, there were 61 units of equipment and only 15 airplanes. As a result, Putin's special military operation is going so perfectly according to plan that by 2026 there won't be any equipment at all on Red Square. By the way, it's still unclear which foreign leaders will attend the 2026 parade. On Monday, the press secretary of the Russian president, Dmitry Peskov, was unable to name any foreign leaders who would come to visit Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin's aide, Yuri Ushakov, stated that several foreign politicians will be guests of the balding dictator. However, for some reason, he was also unable to name them. Well, for example, in Mali, Africa, there's a junta that is supported by Vladimir Putin. They are simply losing power under the pressure of the Tuareg rebels. Well, maybe this junta will come to Putin's parade of shame. It's also interesting that the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico, had previously announced plans to visit Moscow. But on April 19, he said that Latvia and Lithuania refused to let his plane through. Later, Estonia made a similar decision, and Fico requested a corridor to fly through Poland. As a result, last week Fico announced that he had decided simply not to take part in this parade of shame in Moscow. Later, it became known that in St. Petersburg, following Moscow, they also decided to hold the Victory Parade on May 9 in a reduced format. The event is planned without the traditional procession of military equipment. There won't even be the restored T-34 tank, which in recent years was usually the first to appear. Well, it's possible that even this tank has already been sent to the front. Cadets from military universities will take part in the parade, but there won't be any Nakhimov cadets, Suvorov cadets, or cadet school students among them, just like in Moscow. And when people started openly mocking the Russians like, hey, what happened to your parade? Hello, brave Russians. How's the special military operation going? Everything according to plan, everything's awesome, everything's great, and where'd the parade go? And after that, the Kremlin announced that the decision to cancel part of the parade was due to a terrorist threat from Kyiv. Can you imagine? A quote from Peskov, Putin's press secretary. All measures are being taken to minimize the danger. The parade will take place, but let's not forget that last year it was an anniversary parade. A full-scale one, the kind you have for a round number anniversary, though it's not an anniversary. That's just how it was planned. Why do you care so much about the equipment? But actually, besides the shortage of equipment even at the front, and besides Vladimir Putin's fear that Ukrainian drones and missiles might strike the parade, the real reason for cancelling the parade could simply be a lack of money. There's no money, and I'll explain why. Russian savings have become almost the only source of financing for the economy, since, due to sanctions, Western capital markets are closed to Russian companies. This was stated by the head of the Central Bank of the Russian Federation, Elvira Nabiullina. Here is her quote. And just listen to this, the cynicism and audacity of these Russians. Just listen to what she says. Before I quote Nabiullina, I want to remind you that since around 2008, Russians have harbored a fierce hatred for the West. The West is bad. The West is trying to enslave Mother Russia. In the West, what did they have? Gay parades and all that? Well, you get the idea. And in general, you remember that for about 20 years now, Russians have been saying the West is about to collapse and the American dollar is about to disappear. Europe is about to disappear and so on. Now Nabiullina says, and I quote, until 2022, our borrowers, our companies had access to, let's call it the savings of European and US citizens, specifically their savings. Since inflation in these countries was low, interest rates were low. Our companies could borrow those savings there at quite low rates. To put it simply, our export. The export sector, which took out these loans abroad, could borrow from citizens of Europe and the US to increase the production of goods that were supplied there for export. But now global savings are unavailable to us. The only source of financing is Russian savings. If you didn't get it, Nabiullina admits that these wild Russians shamelessly took advantage of the benefits of the West. They shamelessly took money from the West, for their own development and so on. But at the same time, these same Russians fiercely hated the West. So much so, in fact, that they started a war because of their hatred. As a result, the Minister of Finance of the Russian Federation, Anton Siluanov, found a recipe for how to get the Russian economy back on its feet. He stated that Russian citizens should take their own savings out from under their pillows. Take them to the banking system or the financial market, so that the money starts to grow, to work for the state. Next is a quote from Siluanov. Every person has some savings. How should you manage them? You can put them under your pillow, not using these resources, or you can learn to manage them by investing in different instruments. The simplest way is bank deposits. The money you keep under your pillow loses value over time. And money invested in bank deposits or investments contributes to the development of the Russian economy. Yes. The point is that the Kremlin simply started asking Russians to take out their savings and give them to the bald dictator Vladimir Putin for his war against Ukraine and the entire West.